Picture a woman walking calmly past armed soldiers, carrying a wicker basket that appears to hold nothing more than tools or laundry, while underneath a thin cloth lies a sleeping infant, drugged just enough to stay silent, its tiny chest rising and falling as death waits only a few feet away on either side of the checkpoint. Now, picture her doing this not once, but again and again, week after week, year after year, smuggling child after child past the very people who would have killed them on sight if they had been discovered. This is not a scene from a thriller movie. This is the true story of a woman who used her position as a nurse to carry out one of the most extraordinary rescue operations of the 20th century, saving the lives of hundreds of children trapped inside a brutal war zone where their very existence had been marked for extermination. She worked inside hospitals and clinics that treated the sick and wounded, but behind that respectable cover, she was running a secret network designed to pull children out of danger and place them with families who would hide them until the violence ended. Every single day she went to work. She carried the knowledge that one mistake, one suspicious guard, one informant whispering the wrong words to the wrong officer could end not only her own life, but the lives of every child she had already saved and every family sheltering them. She moved through checkpoints using medical bags, ambulances, coffins, and even funeral processions to conceal children of all ages, from newborns who had to be sedated to stay quiet, to older children who had to be coached for hours on a new name, a new religion, a new family history they would have to repeat flawlessly if questioned. She kept meticulous records hidden in jars buried beneath trees, tiny scraps of paper recording each child's real name and original family, so that if any of them survived the war, there might be a chance of reuniting them with relatives who had also lived through the horror. The risk she carried was almost unimaginable. She was operating inside a system built specifically to detect and eliminate exactly the kind of resistance she represented, surrounded by surveillance, informants, and patrols that treated any hint of smuggling as grounds for immediate execution. Yet she continued, driven by a conviction that no child deserved to die simply because of who their parents were or where they happened to be born. By the time the worst of the violence subsided, this single woman had personally helped save the lives of hundreds of children who would otherwise have been murdered. And her story remains one of the most powerful examples in modern history of how one ordinary person, armed with nothing but courage, medical training, and an unbreakable moral conviction, can defy an entire machine of organized cruelty. Stay with this story, because what she risked, what she sacrificed, and what she ultimately accomplished will leave you stunned at how far a single human being is capable of going to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Before the war reached her doorstep, she lived an unremarkable life, working as a nurse in a city hospital, caring for patients with the same quiet dedication shown by countless healthcare workers around the world. But when occupying forces arrived and began rounding up entire populations based on ethnicity and religion, confining families behind walls and fences in conditions designed to starve and weaken them before eventual extermination, she watched the suffering unfold directly outside the hospital where she worked. Children were dying from disease, malnutrition, and violence at a horrifying rate, and adults who tried to protect them faced brutal punishment for any act of resistance. It would have been easy, even reasonable by ordinary standards, for her to focus only on her assigned duties and avoid drawing dangerous attention to herself. Instead, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She began using her medical credentials, which granted her rare access to restricted areas, to identify children who were orphaned, abandoned, or whose parents recognized that the only chance of survival for their child was separation. She approached desperate parents with an impossible proposition, offering to take their children to safety, while warning them honestly that she could not promise they would ever see each other again. Many parents, faced with the certainty of death if their children stayed, made the heartbreaking choice to trust a stranger with the lives of their sons and daughters. From that moment forward, she built a clandestine operation that grew larger and more sophisticated with every successful rescue, recruiting trusted colleagues, sympathetic guards willing to look the other way, and ordinary citizens willing to risk their own lives by hiding children inside their homes. The methods she developed to move children past heavily armed checkpoints reflected a combination of medical knowledge, psychological insight, and raw nerve. Infants posed a particular challenge because crying could instantly expose an entire operation, so she learned to administer carefully measured doses of sedatives that would keep babies calm and quiet during the most dangerous moments of transport, timing the dosage precisely so the child would remain still through the checkpoint without suffering harm from the medication. She frequently used ambulances and medical transport vehicles that guards were less likely to search thoroughly given the implied presence of contagious illness, hiding children beneath stretchers, inside supply crates, or wrapped in bandages designed to make them appear as patients rather than escapees. On other occasions, she coordinated with funeral services, using coffins and hearses to move children disguised among the deceased, understanding that grieving processions received less scrutiny from soldiers who had grown desensitized to death after years of occupation and violence. For older children capable of understanding instructions, she spent hours preparing them mentally for the journey ahead, drilling them on fabricated names, religious practices unfamiliar to their actual upbringing, and family backstories they would need to recite convincingly if questioned by suspicious authorities. This psychological preparation was just as critical as the physical smuggling itself, because a single nervous slip or contradictory detail could unravel the entire disguise and lead to immediate arrest, interrogation, and likely execution, not only for the child, but for everyone connected to the rescue chain. Once children successfully passed through checkpoints, they were placed with sympathetic families, religious institutions, and rural households willing to shelter them, despite the severe danger this posed to their own safety. Many of these host families had to teach the children new prayers, new customs, and entirely new identities, almost overnight, blending them seamlessly into households where neighbors, local officials, and occasionally even extended family members had no idea. The child sheltered inside was not biologically their own. The nurse maintained contact with as many of these placements as she could, monitoring conditions where possible and occasionally relocating children if she suspected their hiding place had become compromised or unsafe. Throughout this entire operation, she lived under constant threat of betrayal, since the network she built depended on dozens of people, keeping dangerous secrets, any one of whom could have been captured, tortured, and forced to reveal information that would expose the entire operation and everyone involved in it. Despite several close calls, including moments when she herself was questioned by suspicious officials and forced to rely on quick thinking and calm composure to avoid arrest, she continued her work for years, expanding her reach and refining her methods as the war dragged on and the danger facing children inside the restricted zone only intensified. She understood that every child she successfully placed represented not just one life saved, but potentially an entire family line that would otherwise have been erased completely. And this understanding fueled her determination even as the physical and emotional toll of the work grew heavier with each passing month. The records she kept, hidden away in jars buried in secret locations, represented her quiet insistence that these children would not simply vanish into anonymous safety, that someday, if the world survived this nightmare, there might be a way to trace each child back to whatever remained of their original family and history. As the war eventually drew toward its conclusion, the full scale of destruction and loss became impossible to ignore, with entire communities wiped out and countless families never reunited with the children who had been smuggled to safety years earlier. The nurse who had orchestrated this extraordinary rescue network faced the difficult task of attempting to locate the buried records she had hidden, hoping to use them to reconnect surviving children with whatever family members had managed to live through the violence. This process proved heartbreaking in many cases, as the records revealed that most of the children's parents had not survived, meaning the very people who had trusted her with their children's lives were gone forever, leaving these children as orphans even after their physical safety had been secured. Still, in a number of remarkable cases, families were reunited. Parents who had survived against incredible odds were able to find children they believed they would never see again, and these reunions stood as living proof of just how significant her dangerous work had truly been. The full scope of her actions did not become widely known immediately after the war ended, as she herself remained largely quiet about her role, viewing her actions not as something deserving of recognition, but simply as something she felt morally compelled to do, given the circumstances she found herself in. It was only years later, through painstaking historical research, survivor testimonies, and the eventual discovery of her hidden records, that the true magnitude of her rescue operation became clear to the wider world. Historians studying her actions have since recognized her as one of the most effective and courageous rescuers of the era. A woman whose quiet, methodical defiance saved more lives than many military operations carried out with far greater resources and far less personal risk. Her story raises a question that continues to resonate with anyone who learns about it. What would an ordinary person be willing to risk if faced with the same choice she confronted every single day? The choice between safety and silence on one hand, and danger and conscience on the other. She chose conscience, repeatedly, for years, fully aware that capture meant almost certain death, not just for herself, but for the very children she was trying desperately to protect. The hundreds of lives she saved went on to live entire lifetimes that would never have existed without her intervention, having children and grandchildren of their own, building families and communities that trace their entire existence back to the courage of one nurse who refused to stand by while innocent children were marked for death. Her legacy endures today not just as a historical footnote, but as a profound demonstration of moral courage under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. A reminder that even within systems built entirely around cruelty and destruction, individual human beings retain the capacity to choose compassion, to choose resistance, and to choose action over passive acceptance of horror. The story of the nurse who smuggled hundreds of children out of a war zone stands as one of history's most powerful testaments to what one determined person, armed with nothing more than skill, courage, and unwavering moral clarity, can accomplish even when the entire world around them seems determined to prove that such compassion has no place left to survive.